speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers, speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their futures. Soldiers, speak out.
I'm going to start with the slideshow that I've developed for the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, which we've used before our gatherings at Ground Zero, going out to confront the Trident submarine system. I've updated it for folks here today. I'm Dave Hall. I'm a child adolescent psychiatrist, former national and local president of Physicians for Social Responsibility, and a longtime member of the Ground Zero Center since the middle 80s. My college reunion book actually had me with creosote on the butt of my pants when we sat on the tracks out in front of the Bangor base way back in the 80s. What I have here today is a talk about a slideshow about 20 minutes long that will cover medical consequences and the political policies behind the United States' still very firm central commitment to nuclear weapons as our projected presence around the world. Why am I doing this work? Nuclear weapons present quite possibly the gravest threat to human health. They violate laws of war and humanitarian law. They preempt enormous resources needed for direct human benefit, and I consider them the cancerous vestiges of the 20th century wars. 1986 was almost a watershed. Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev met in Reykjavik and came very close to agreeing to eliminate nuclear weapons. The stumbling block was the United States' refusal to hold off on the missile shield, Star Wars, long enough to try to negotiate something, and the rapprochement at that point fell apart. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists in 1947 developed the atomic clock. This is the doomsday clock, which puts all human history into 24 hours. So at the end of 24 hours, that's the end of human history. The closest we came was 3 minutes to midnight, 3 minutes to the end of civilization in the 80s, around the confrontations between the US and the Soviet Union and during the missile crisis in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's currently 5 minutes to midnight, and it's been stuck here. 2012 is the last time it moved. And just to share a little bit of this with you, 2012 was the hottest year on record in the contiguous United States, marked by devastating drought and brutal storms. These extreme events are exactly what climate models predict for an atmosphere laden with greenhouse gases. It was also a year of unrealized opportunity to reduce nuclear stockpiles, to lower the immediacy of destruction from weapons on alert, and to control the spread of fissile materials and keep nuclear terrorism at bay. We are passing up all kinds of opportunities. This is a look at Seattle from across Hood Canal, and this showed up in the Seattle Times, and they didn't realize that the brown on the bottom of the picture is SwiftPack. It's the nuclear weapons storage facility on the Bangor base. They thought that the water between Seattle and here was Hood Canal. In fact, it's Liberty Bay, just near Paulsbo. But this is where Bangor is the site of where roughly half of the active nuclear weapons in the United States arsenal are staged. Just a tribute here to Biggs, who's here with me. This is the Disarm 5 Plowshares group that entered the Bangor base on November 2nd, 2009. Spent 4 hours on the base with Biggs popping his nitroglycerin as they sort of walked in the open into the secure area where the nuclear weapons are stored. And they were finally apprehended, and Biggs spent 6 months in prison for that. Several of the others spent several years. So how did we get in this mess, and where are we now? Nuclear weapons were developed during World War II in a race with Nazi Germany, and it was considered that if the Allies didn't win the race, then Germany would win the war with nuclear weapons. That's where the Manhattan Project was developed, and the United States developed the first weapons and used them for only the first and only time against civilian populations at Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of the war, although the Japanese were within weeks of surrendering anyway. Just Harry Truman said, "We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. This weapon is to be used against Japan. We will use it so that military objectives and soldiers and sailors are the target and not women and children." Well, that's history. So these are from official documents. The strategic deterrence has been the sole mission of the Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarine. These are the submarines at Bangor. We have the largest collection of nuclear weapons right here on Hood Canal. It's the nation's most survivable and enduring nuclear strike capability, and it remains the center of the nuclear triad. And as we are reducing weapons, Trident is gaining more and more centrality to American nuclear weapons projection around the world. The 2010 Nuclear Posture Review, this is the Obama administration. The key thing here is number 5. They want to prevent nuclear proliferation, reduce the role of the weapons in our security strategy. But 5, we are going to sustain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal until such time as these other things are gone. And this is the trip point where we are now rebuilding the entire nuclear weapons complex. And they deferred or refused to de-alert the weapons. That means take the weapons off almost instantaneous capacity to launch, which means that we're still on hair trigger alert with Russia. The quadrennial defense review every 4 years. This again is the Obama administration. Nuclear capabilities will be maintained as a core mission for the Department of Defense. Vision 2020, keep this in mind. This is from the year 2000. This was the Bush administration, but it's still American policy. Full spectrum dominance is the key term. Full spectrum dominance means the ability of U.S. forces operating alone or with allies to defeat any adversary and control any situation across the range of military operations, land, sea, air, or space. So, are we worshiping the warships? As the U.S. and Russia reduce our nuclear arsenals, the Tridents become the primary launch platform. These are the deployed Tridents. There are 14 of them. 8 of them are home-ported here in Bangor. So we have the predominant nuclear force on the West Coast, and it's been shifted toward China, and I'll talk about this a little more, away from the old Soviet Union and Russia, because we are, in fact, carrying on negotiations with Russia. So Naval Base Kitsap Bangor, it's the home to the most lethal concentration of weapons of mass destruction anywhere in the world. There's not another place on the planet that has control over as much destructive capability as our folks right here on Hood Canal. It's also the pride of the Navy, and when they brought the USS Pennsylvania in, this is one of the Trident submarines, it was a huge Navy celebration. It's now been retrofitted with D5 missiles. These are missiles that can go 4,000 to 5,000 miles, and where the C4, the smaller missiles, could hit a baseball diamond at 3,000 miles, the D5 can hit home plate at 4,000 miles. These are highly accurate first strike weapons, and this is why Robert Aldrich, when he was working for Lockheed in developing the Trident system, left the work, alerted folks around the country. That's when Jim and Shelley Douglas learned about it and started the Ground Zero community. And Bob and Janet Aldrich have been involved in this ever since, and their families. The medical, environmental, and environmental consequences. The W-88 warhead is almost a half megaton hydrogen bomb, which the Tridents can carry on their 24 missiles, 4 to a missile. fortified to a missile. So they can carry up to 96 of these weapons. This is just going to take a look at what one of these weapons would do over the city of Seattle. The red dots in the center, that's Seattle. Up on the left is sub-base Bangor. It's about 20 miles, 20 air miles. So the red dot in the very center is the fireball. This is the heat of the sun, which melts dirt. The orange is near total fatalities. That goes out to about 2 kilometers from ground zero. The green dot is widespread blast destruction. Anything that's not hidden behind a hill or some other huge kind of object is going to be blown down right back to its sort of steel frame. And then third-degree burns for anybody that happens to be in the direct line of the blast. Third-degree burns, those are the ones that put you into the burn units in places like Harborview. But keep in mind that the one burn unit in this particular region is in that red dot in the center. It's gone. Okay, and we have it's the largest this side of the Mississippi, and they have, I think, capacity for about 50 burn patients. We're talking about a metropolitan area here of probably 1 million during the day, 600,000 at night, and many of those folks would be burned, and there'd be no medical response. Up on the right there is just taking a look at what the Hiroshima bomb looks like in comparison. That's just one bomb. If we set off a number of these bombs to the rough equivalent of 100 megatons, you get nuclear winter, as Carl Sagan and the others described it in the 1980s, whereby it would block out the sun for up to 2 or 3 months, basically destroying agriculture, starvation, and all the rest of that. More recently, they've done, with the much more powerful climate programs that they have now, a new look at what would happen if only 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs were unleashed between India and Pakistan, for example. And what it shows is much more devastating an environmental impact than was originally thought. Their work suggests that 20 million people in the South Asian war between India and Pakistan could die in the first 2 weeks from the immediate blast and the short-term effects, and up to 1 billion people in the region, because of the climate effects, would be at risk. There's close to 750 million people in that region of Asia that are already food insecure, and if the agricultural capacities are essentially destroyed by blocking out the sun for weeks to months, then those folks would very likely die of starvation. This is just a look at what would happen on day 9. You can see the smoke around the globe. This is around the globe. And we know from Mount St. Helens some of this information. This is day 49. It's not just the northern hemisphere anymore. It's all the way down to the south of South America. That's the environmental impact of a small nuclear war. If the United States and Russia, for example, were to unleash theirs, that would be a total catastrophe. A Trident submarine carries roughly 30 times the nuclear capacity, the nuclear explosive capacity of this war that I'm talking about. So how many are there? Well, we'll just go through this quickly. If you look at the bottom, you'll see that they're deployed. The U.S. has about 1,950, 650. These are at Bangor. These are the deployed weapons. The stored weapons are a little higher. And it's only the U.S., Russia, Britain, and France that actually are deploying their weapons at this point. China has about 300. India and Pakistan each have about 100 each. Israel has 80 and the capacity to maybe make 200. They have the plutonium for 200. And Korea has something, North Korea has something less than 10. Now, since Russia's our really only strategic nuclear threat, it's the only country that has the large armaments, you know, what's going on here? What's going on here? Well, what's going on is that there's been a shift toward China. That's when the balance of the Trident subs came from Kings Bay on the east coast and the Atlantic coast, Kings Bay, Georgia, out to Bangor, out here on the west coast. And that shift took place about a decade ago. And now there's much more going on in terms of trying to confront China. Interestingly, there has been some tension with the former Soviets, with Russia, and that's over the United States and NATO ringing Russia with missile defense capacities, much of which is now seaborne on ships. But anyway, Medvedev in 2000 and November 23rd, 2011, essentially said, if the situation continues to develop, not to Russia's favor, we reserve the right to discontinue further disarmament and control of measures, may withdraw from the start, and they're talking about putting weapons right on the border of Europe in Kaliningrad. Well, in fact, they did that. They did that just about 2 or 3 months ago. This is the Trident. This is the Russian version of the Trident ship. This is the Bulava. And they have successfully tested their missiles finally, as of about 2 years ago. They've had a number of failures, but they finally got it working. And this is what Vladimir Putin has just stationed these nuclear missiles in Kaliningrad, which is right next to Poland and Estonia, right next to the Baltic Sea there. So, where are we now? Obama in 2008 in Prague was saying we need to get rid of these weapons. But in fact, Chuck Hagel, who briefly belonged to the group Global Zero, which is a number of international leaders, political leaders, country leaders, and so on, calling for zero nuclear weapons. He has resigned from Global Zero, and he's now saying that the United States has always supported a strong nuclear deterrent and would continue to do so, even as it braces for a nuclear forces overhaul that analysts say could cost $1 trillion over 30 years. His closing comment, he added, the country has always been willing to make that investment, and I think it will continue to make it. And he's in the process of going around, after all of the bad news about soldiers and sailors on nuclear alert, the ones in the silos and so on, the bad morale problem, going around trying to sort of buck them up a little bit. And the nuclear triad is also up for modernization, but in particular the Trident system itself is up for modernization, and that's something we're going to try to work on here. But the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies calculated that the upgrade of the nuclear triad would cost $1 trillion over 30 years. So where are we bombed? Well, here's Chengdu. We've been there. This is where the Panda Reserve is. It's just outside of Chengdu. We stopped there on our way up to Lhasa when we went to the IPPNW meeting in Beijing in 2003. It's a city of 14 million people. Okay. Anyway, the United States Air Force will dramatically expand its military presence across the Pacific this year. This is a little earlier this year. Sending jets to Thailand, India, Singapore, and Australia. The idea behind its pivot is simple. Ring China with U.S. and allied forces, just like the West did to the Soviet Union back in the Cold War. So we're on our way for another Cold War. The military need to keep going is huge. Okay, just a quick comment about the connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. This is the tsunami coming into Fukushima. This is the Fukushima power plant, and all 4 of the reactors there melted down. They have yet to get them under control in 2014. They are still radiating the ocean. In fact, they're finding microscopic cesium from Fukushima in some of the fish in Puget Sound. It's not in any way a health risk, it's just telling us how it's dispersing through the environment. And this is just sort of the back talk. The Bloomberg Business Week is basically saying it's not a big deal. Fukushima has not had a tremendous effect on the industry, says Jeremy Gordon of the World Nuclear Association. So they're out there pushing away. So what does it cost us? Nuclear weaponry takes about 1/3 of the U.S. defense budget if you sort of take all the different ways in which it goes through different parts of the budget. This is just taking a quick look at it. Nuclear forces, expected additional costs, and so on. This slideshow, by the way, I can put it up on the web, and folks are welcome to take it down and look at it in more detail. The SSBNs, that's the Trident submarines. Their lifespan goes through 2040, and the plan right now is to build 12 new ones. They're going to be the same length. They're going to have, rather than 24 tubes, they're going to have 16. I think the British Tridents are going to have 12 missile tubes, and a price tag of, it's actually about $93 billion right now, starting with when the Ohio, which was the first, ends its life cycle in 2029. But they're already spending about $1 billion a year right now on planning and design.
Is that before the cost overruns?
Well, we're not, yeah, and inflation and so on. Through the Pacific Life community, we had a chance to go to Los Alamos a few years back, and they're basically rebuilding a facility there to take the place of Rocky Flats, which was the plutonium production facility, the production facility for the pits for the nuclear weapons. The United States signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but which calls for a steady disarmament in good faith, but we're in fact rebuilding our capacity to build up these weapons again. So what do we do now? Well, it's our responsibility to do the best we can to make sure these weapons are never used again. That's the key piece. There are a number of international efforts that are going on right now. ICAN, International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, was started by International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and now has about 80 international NGOs working together internationally, and they're sponsoring the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons work. There was a conference in Sweden and a new conference coming up in Mexico City here shortly. The International Red Crescent Red Cross has taken it on as a total violation of health and humanitarian concerns. They want the abolition, Global Zero. We've talked about, these are international leaders, many political figures. United Nations Non-Aligned Movement, I'll say a little more about that, has 125 delegations calling for it. And then there's us. That's you and me, but also the United States. We're the sort of principal driver of nuclear weapons development. The Non-Aligned Movement has made this statement: the realization of a world free from nuclear weapons is the group of non-aligned movement states, parties' highest priority. So we do have many allies in all of this. The Conference on Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons in Norway took a hit in the long-time conflict between Norway and Sweden when the Swedish ambassador said that Norway wasn't a serious state, and the states that came were not serious states to consider the humanitarian consequences of these weapons. U.S. State Department said for that, and they're about to do the same thing, only after careful consideration, yuck, yuck, yuck. In close consultation with the rest of the P5, those are the 5 nuclear halves that are on the Security Council, we decided not to attend. And basically it said that it's a distraction from the sort of the process that they're involved in. You can come out to Bangor. This is the front gate of Bangor, for those of you that haven't been there. This is the main gate. This is the blue line. Yeah, well, there's some commentary here that you won't see it at the base, but in terms of base closed and some other things here, they won't tell you that there's weapons of mass destruction there. That's a national secret. Yuck, yuck. Okay. We can't even hang the signs over this freeway overpass anymore because they're afraid we're going to drop it on somebody's head. This is the current explosives handling wharf. This is where they crane the missiles in and out of the submarines, and they do that on a regular basis to refurbish, check them and so on. And they're now wanting to build a second wharf. In fact, they've already started at a cost of about $750 some odd $1 million. And we, in fact, the local Physicians for Social Responsibility and Ground Zero together have just filed an appeal to the judge's dismissal of our lawsuit against the Navy, trying to essentially force the Navy to do a realistic environmental assessment of the possibility that one of these missiles explodes and what would happen in the surrounding community. The Navy's so far said it's less than 1 in a million possibility, and they refused to do it, and the judge in the local district went along with that, so we're about to appeal that to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. This is just the judge's rejection of the lawsuit. We've also started a No to New Trident program. Leonard Iger is the one that's leading this. This is No to the rebuild of the Trident system. We're trying to get to our Congress people here. Rick Larson and Adam Smith are both on the House Armed Services Committee, and we're trying to get them to kind of show some backbone against the military-industrial complex. Yeah, they're roughly estimating $350 billion to build and operate these for another 40 years into the end of this century. This is the Ground Zero house. This is the Ground Zero gathering. This is the precious earth. This is Ground Zero. Thank you very much. So I want to invite Bix to come on up here. Bix is my hero. He is a one-person peace group with always somebody in his trail. The funnest birthday party I ever went to was Bix's 80th birthday party over at St. Leo's. Is that where we were? Holy Cross. Sorry, at Holy Cross. 300 people showed up for his birthday party. And he said all he wanted for his birthday as a present was for people to come with him out to Bangor and vigil at the gate. Not necessarily to get arrested, but to vigil at the gate. And over 70 people went with him out there to Bangor. This man's amazing. He's been to Hiroshima. He's been to, most recently, Jeju Island. I didn't show you some of the slides there, but he can talk about that. He's been to Fastlane, which is the site of the British Trident submarines. Bix, come and talk about these wonderful things that you've done.
And I hope to, live up to his great portrait of me. But so I guess I would say just initially, my life at Bangor began in the 70s. I think first time I was arrested there was 1976 when we carried a replica of the Trident into the base itself, and then there have been a number of actions since then. But more than anything, I think, it's just to be in touch with great people like David Hall and his wife Ann and all the different people in Tom Carlin that have worked and been so faithful in resistance to this, and that's what it takes, resistance. And then over the years, I know that just when we had the fire up there, one of the houses that we had at Ground Zero, it burned. We're not quite sure of the origin of the fire, but anyway, we had to rebuild, and that was the one that really spearheaded that was David Hall, to make sure that we would be there, certainly as long as those weapons are there. And but what I wanted just to speak a little bit too about, well, number one, just the horror of nuclear weapons. For the most part, I think we all, to a certain degree in our population, is pretty much, a shrug of the shoulders, nuclear weapons, so what's the big deal? There was a rise in awareness, certainly during the 80s, but then now it's, they're there, don't get so excited, and, we're not going to use them, or, then there are those who say, well, yes, let's use them, and, but it's just, they breed nothing but hopelessness, I had Dick McSorley, who taught at Georgetown, a Jesuit priest, and he said that the taproot of violence in our society is because of our assent to nuclear weapons, to assent to the fact the use of nuclear weapons, and so we can trace, just the tremendous rise in violence in our own society. It's as I say, the biggest assault rifle we have is a nuclear weapon, and then down, everyone has armed themselves with guns galore against one another. And so we live in a climate of hopelessness and fear that is pretty pervasive, I think. And so I think, a nuclear weapon is anything but our friend. It's anything but a deterrent. There's been more and more wars that have happened, that sense our nuclear shield, sense our nuclear deterrent policies. But they are intended, nuclear weapons are intended to rip the flesh off the body, to rip and to destroy and distort and burn, sizzle, and to vaporize, and have people just stand briefly with skin hanging from their arms, from their bodies. They are anything but human. And how can we allow that within our midst? There are hundreds of issues in the United States, whether it's the war in Afghanistan, or our drone bombing, or Pakistan, or Iraq, or the Sudan, or what happens in our own country as far as the healthcare, education, the things that are so desperately needed by people. There are 10,000 things, but to me, what sits in the middle of all that is the reason we're pushing people around is our nuclear weapon superiority, and I think that's the heart and soul of resistance. And I just would like to mention a little bit about going to Jeju Island of South Korea. How many of here in here have heard of Jeju Island before? Oh, well, that's pretty good. That's great. Well, I had not. This is a couple of years ago, and I had not heard of Jeju Island until I think Bruce Gagnon and Dennis Apple went over there, and they made a documentary, and I was amazed to see that. First of all, it's this island about 60 miles south of mainland South Korea, the peninsula, and also had no idea that the Navy was building another Navy base there against the will and wishes of the people, and they've already destroyed the coral reef surrounding the island and the rocks which are very sacred to them, which have great ceremonial, sacred meaning and significance to them. That's been destroyed. And just, it was dedicated by one of the prime ministers of South Korea as an island, an international island of peace. And, the deep contradiction about these weapons of destruction that will be introduced into this port, at Jeju Island. And it'll be a port where they're not quite clear. They think it'll be a port for aircraft carriers as well as Trident submarines, and certainly it would be a port for the Aegis destroyer, which is a prime missile defense system that we have now. And they're linking that missile defense system up with Japan as well, and they're trying to do that with Korea as well. The whole sense of we will, as David pointed out, we are surrounding China. And this now, the North or South Koreans are very aware of this, that this base is being put up not to be any defense against North Korea, as they were saying, as much as to ring China. It's something like 350 kilometers from China itself, and it's intended to be part of that ring, But for me, going there was probably one of the most moving experiences I've had of a faith community in resistance to real militarism, in resistance to this thing, you know, that's been going on for 7 years. What's happened there, and every day they're there blocking. There are 2 gates now where they block these 2 gates. The people, the villagers, and what really drew my attention, there's a lot of Catholic priests and nuns there. I would say, gee, if this happened in the United States, they ship me there somewhere, you know. But there it was, and I saw that, and I thought it was wonderful, you know. And then to see also to meet a bishop who was just very not supportive, but is a real inspiration for this resistance, you know. And then my own Jesuit order, they have 3 of the Jesuits have been assigned full-time resistance to the naval base, which upped the Jesuits in my own estimation a bit. But anyway, I was just so taken by their consistency, and to me it was I thought I saw there a pool of strength, of spirituality, though they feel less than David and Goliath. They feel very insignificant in a lot of ways, you know. But every day they are there. Every day they don't miss. They are there constantly, you know, day in, day out. And they have nuns' orders in South Korea. They have about, I think it's about 18, that they have pledged 2 nuns a week. Each order pledges 2 nuns a week to fly into to the villages, Gangjeon village and Jeju Island is where the base is going up. And but you know, just the constancy, the commitment. I was so deeply moved by that, you know, and would hope, you know, and just you know, they are a real sign, just like the works of war are constant and unrelenting. So the works of peace there on Jeju are just, they're unrelenting, even though they know that they are vastly outnumbered, and you know, but they continue, and to me it was a great sign of hope that they showed there on it. So
I thought Obama said we are going to keep the Korean Peninsula nuclear free. That is our objective.
yeah, that's news to me.
That used to.
No, I know. I said that's news to me.
That's news to you.
Yeah, right.
It may be that
Yeah.
he's keeping South Korea nuclear free in terms of not having any nuclear weapons present on the land in South Korea, but the Trident submarines patrolling there.
So this is a base for them.
The base on Jeju
Yeah, they,
is a Korean base built by the Korean military, but it will be used, as I understand it, exclusively by the U.S. military.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's being the agent, the construction agent is Samsung. You know.
that is the American company.
No, that's a Korean company.
Korean company.
It's a Korean company. Yeah. And like David said, yeah, I think it is. You know that. You know, as far as nuclear weapons being installed on Korea, I think there is that agreement. That's right. That's right. But
this stands outside that agreement.
yeah.
Keep in mind that the Trident submarine, we didn't talk about this, but it patrols at Cold War levels at this point. The missiles on those subs, typically there's 4 of them at sea at any given time. They roam the entire Pacific out the Indian Ocean, from the Atlantic side, across the Atlantic. There's not a city on Earth that's outside of a 30-minute missile strike by a Trident submarine, given the appropriate codes from the President of the United States.
But that was going to be a follow-up question. I don't want to hog the discussion, but what is the chain of command that would lead to an order to fire one of those missiles from a Trident submarine? How does that happen?
Well, I mean, officially, as I understand it, the President has to be the one. But in the event that the President is not available, there actually, I understand, are emergency procedures whereby the commander of a submarine under extreme circumstances, would be allowed. They have as well, and Tom Rogers talks about this. Tom is a veteran Navy submarine captain who now works with us at Ground Zero. He spent 30 years chasing the Ruskies, chasing the Soviets around the Pacific in his submarine, tailing the Soviet submarines. He told us that the standing orders are for the captain, if he refuses to fire, given a legitimate order, is to be removed, shot and killed if necessary, and so on, and the missiles are to be fired. So there are these so-called assurances that the policies will be carried out that are in the policy. It's hard to know. If you look at the history of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is the closest we've come to something recently, there were 3 Soviet officers on a nuclear-armed submarine in the Cuban waters that essentially had an order to fire, but they had a policy that said all 3 officers had to agree, and only 1 officer refused to fire, and that's the only reason that they didn't launch a nuclear weapon at the United States in 1962.
Yeah.
That's, you can look that at Arkhipov, I believe was his name. You can look that up on Wikipedia.
Yes, I saw that history in the documentary of those Russian submarines. What you're saying is very scary, that sub-commanders in the United States Navy, under certain circumstances, would have that authority, because mistakes can be made.
No question. I mean, there's plenty of evidence for close calls. The most recent highly publicized one was like in 1995 when the U.S. set off a weather satellite from Norway, and the back channel to the Soviet embassy didn't turn it in, and at that point I think it was Yeltsin, I'm not sure he was sober, had out the nuclear football, and he had about 7 minutes to decide whether to retaliate or not. Again, these are all sort of written up. We also had an accident out here at Bangor with one of the missiles where in 2003 they winched a stepladder that was in the silo to hook the winch cable onto the top of the missile. Got left there while they went to lunch, and a different crew came in and winched the missile up with the stepladder, the foot of the stepladder getting within about a foot of one of the warheads on the bus at the top of the missile. There was no particular risk that the nuclear part of the missile would go off, but there's close to 3 million pounds of TNT in the propellant in the missiles, so that if it were to ignite the missile fuel, that there could have been an enormous dispersion of, well, the weapons themselves, the plutonium in the weapons, and so on. And that was 2003 right here on Hood Canal.
There's going to be, there's a Jesuit priest who is working on an international conference on Jeju Island sometime in the fall, or possibly late August, but he's very interested in representation, I think, from different countries, and to meet there, I think, in Gangjeon village itself, so there's a bit of a momentum building that way, although that isn't too well publicized as yet.
When will it be?
Right at this point, it's not definite, but they're thinking about late August or in the fall. And also they have hopes that, well, this is kind of a religious bite, but Pope Francis is supposed to visit South Korea sometime about that time. They want to get him there on Jeju.
That might be interesting.
Yeah, that could be. That could. That could be.
Anybody interested in hearing Biggs talk about walking into the Bangor base?
How did that work?
Yeah, were you
Well,
invited in? Bill?
Yeah, we were invited in, yeah. Yeah. Well, there were five of us. There was Steve Kelly, he's a Jesuit priest too, and then Sister Ann Montgomery, who since has died, and then Susan Crane, who had lived in a Jonah house for a number of years before she came out to the west, and also Lynn Greenwald, who lives in Tacoma with us at the Catholic Worker Place. But anyway, we had met for almost a year, deciding what are we going to do and how are we going to do this, about nuclear weapons. And we've somewhat had an idea it would probably be Bangor in some way or something, but we weren't quite sure. So that was part of our discernment process that we met. We met a couple times a month, for almost a year, and then trying to discern, pray over it, and then finally it ended up, yes, we will go into the Bangor base. And then we had, on Google, we had seen what David mentioned, SwiftPack. That's Strategic Weapons Pacific. That's where the nuclear weapons are stored. And we looked at that, and it looked very, very forbidden, and looked very intimidating and everything else, but anyway, we thought, well, maybe we can get close to there, and so we cut our way through one fence, and then it was early in the morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then we were heading down the road, and then we thought we were going to have to go through the brush and bushes and everything, but we found at this time of the morning we could use their roads there. They have a regular village there, so one car did come while we were walking. We all hit the bushes, and so we okay. And then we followed. There was a power line that went down about a mile, down towards the Trident Pier, or the Delta Pier. So we followed that, and then at that we weren't quite sure. We had to stop when we got there whether. Steve Kelly was thinking a little bit, well, maybe we ought to, if there, go take a look and see if there's a trident there, and then he thought maybe we could swim out. I said, oh my God! I says, I'll stick with the other place. So anyway, we decided there we'd go to the where the weapons are stored, and so. And while we were walking up this road, very much on the fringe of the road, there were 4 trucks came by at a very high speed, and so anyway, we all ducked inside the woods there, and then we found the little road that led right to the northern part of where the SwiftPack, where the weapons are stored. So we got down into that area. And we expected, something to happen. It was a lethal force authorized area, so we didn't know what was going to happen there. And or whether the dogs would be coming or what. So we got up, we got to the first fence, and I was amazed we got that far. We had bolt cutters, and so we let the bolt cutters do the work for us. And we cut through that, and then there was a pathway about 15 feet from the other fence, and that was that had a lot of sensitive transmission and other wires, and so we cut through that, and then we just got through when the Marines came, So the Marines came, and then they had their assault weapons out and everything, and then they no time at all, they had us all flat down on our face, and then they hooded us first, they put hoods on our heads, and, like we're at Guantanamo, and then we were on the ground probably about 3.5 hours Then we were taken in and questioned by the FBI and Navy security officers.
What'd you say when they said, what are you doing here?
What we're saying, well, kind of, what are you doing here? What are they doing here?
Were they amazed you've gotten that far?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were, they didn't have anyone penetrate that far before, and so they were. Well, I was too.
Did you have any signs or any indication to tell who you were? and
Well,
what-
yeah, we did. We carried banners there, and we tried to, we abolish nuclear weapons, and then we all carried blood, little vials of blood, and then hammers. We go in following the injunction of Isaiah, they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and so we carry in hammers and blood, to pour blood. Usually it's a lot of plowshares actions, it'll be be missiles or that you'll pour the blood on. And this way we just poured the blood on the fences. We were about 20, probably about, I'd say about maybe 15 yards from where the weapons were stored. Just certainly, they were right behind, in the bunker right behind. We were inside. Yeah.
Bill, in the courtroom itself, were you allowed to make your case before the judge as the SOA Watch uses the courtroom in Fort Benning to articulate the reasons why this civil disobedience is being done? Did the judge give you that authority or that right, that time to explain your case?
No. See, what happens, they don't allow international law or a necessity defense at all in the courtroom, in the federal courtroom. There's a gag order like that. And if you bring up any of the reasons why you do this, it's against international law, it's against morality, it's against United States law, and so forth. Yeah, you can make statements, about your own state of mind, or you can make statements about, what is dear to you, or what is the motivation out of which you come.
On what charge were you put into jail? Trespassing on federal property?
No, well, the destruction of government property, and then depredation of government property, conspiracy, and then trespass.
So it was the cutting of the wire was the destruction of government
Yeah,
property?
right, yeah.
And the conspiracy part was what?
Well, that we
Conspired together?
conspired together,
Gosh.
so you're right, which we certainly did. But no, it's a good, you're not really, as far as what's admissible in the federal courts, as far as international law or necessity to defend them, that they outlaw it.
Why did you get a lighter sentence than the others?
I think it was age, I think, yeah. But both Sister Ann Montgomery, who had done many more plowshares actions than we both got later sentences than the other.
Bill, was there unrelieved hostility from your jailers and all those people? I mean, was there any sympathy?
Among the others in jail?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
The
think,
enemies.
yeah, right.
Was there?
Yeah, I mean, there was a sense, that, you did this out of conviction and so forth, and so there was no real hostility, on it.
Could you talk a little bit about the jury and it was a jury trial
Yes,
and how that all transpired?
yeah. Well, yeah, it was. It didn't take the jury very long to deliberate. They took them about an hour and a half, and they came out with the verdict guilty. We somewhat expected that, would happen, but We didn't think it'd be that fast, you know. But there was one young guy that was on the jury that after they, you know, the guilty, which had to be unanimous, he came up to a couple of us and apologized. You know, he said the pressure was too great. You know, the pressure was too great to go with the guilty plea.
If you look at the maps of the way in which the United States military bases surround Russia, surround China, surround Iran, we have something on the order of 1,100 military bases around the world, 700 or 800 in the U.S. China, you know, if you look at what China does, they don't have any bases outside of China. They have a number of airfields. We were in Lhasa in 2003, and we saw the jets going in and out of the Lhasa airport, the Chinese jets, and they, you know, some other folks said they ran into an army convoy of about 100 vehicles going around Tibet at that time. This was 2003. The Chinese are very well armed, and they are apparently beginning to build up their nuclear weapons. They have about 300 right now. And experts have said that's enough for any country. You know, I already told you, just 100 weapons by themselves is enough to just devastate whole areas. So the notion about mutual assured destruction is still with us, in the sense that if you use these weapons against a country that has weapons to use back against you, it's going to be catastrophe on both ends of the barrel. So I don't know what we're pushing for. What we keep pushing for politically is to see if there can't be some intensive diplomatic kind of movement. There are a number of countries in the United Nations, for example, that are pushing a nuclear weapons convention that was developed by NGOs. But it's got to get past the Security Council, which is, you know, ruled by the P5, you know, the 5 nuclear weapons countries, so that the structure of the United Nations has a pretty firm veto over the notion of eliminating nuclear weapons until the countries that own them and have them, especially the United States, you know, decide to get rid of them. Bottom line, you know, as military folks, you'd understand this. There is no morality with the policy that an empire is going to project. It's all about power. And the United States is the most powerful empire ever. We have the largest military, we have the largest reach, we have the strongest economy. So in trying to get rid of these weapons, we are directly confronting with moral issues a system that doesn't base any of its decision-making on moral authorities. There's been a big effort in the last 5 years or so trying to push the notion of the humanitarian consequences of the use of nuclear weapons should be a reason they should never be used. They should be eliminated. There was a conference in Norway. The P5 boycotted it. There's one coming up in Mexico. The P5 are going to boycott that again. And what you hear back as the reason is that it gets in the way of the negotiating process that they worked out with the other countries. There's probably some truth to that, but on the other hand, without any kind of moral core to the decision-making, the notion we're ever going to get rid of something that powerful that has that much inertia in terms of the military-industrial investment in these weapons, you know, we're the mosquito and the elephants here.